Hello everyone and welcome to my channel. I'm Katie and today we've got a bit of a mashup. There's two things on the go, so I've decided to try and start and complete a whole sketch pad, and I thought a nice thing to start off with would be using the acrylic inks that I had in the ARTFUL box. Now, I'm not a regular subscriber to ARTFUL, but I did have the December box, and I'll leave a link for you to click on either in the description or on the end card at the end of this video. Now, I'm being quite brave with this sketch pad. This is the first page, and it's always a gamble on the first page. I have a tendency and a track record of just leaving that first page blank, so I don't curse the rest of the book by putting something rubbish on the first page. Or even worse, setting the bar too high. Can anyone else relate to that? Anyway, I digress. So yes, we're on the first page and I'm using the acrylic inks. In the background, I started off with the neat ink and then introduced water to it, and I quite like how it's cockled. I've kept a restricted palette with this as well because that just seems to be my thing at the moment. I've kept to using the purple, the green and the blue that came in the ARTFUL box, as I thought they would be quite nice and atmospheric to work with. I really like how the textures have emerged in the background by just adding diluted ink as well as fresh water as well as neat ink, not necessarily in that order. And I really like that mottled texture. I mean, it's a little bit random and I'm still getting to know these materials, but this is why it's in a sketch pad and not on best paper. Now, speaking of paper, I think this is cartridge paper. This is actually a sketch pad that I ambled together myself. I'm no expert at journal making or book binding, but I followed a few tutorials online and I kind of came up with this one, and I thought, I have a lot of random sheets of paper or half-used sketch pads, and I thought it would be a nice way to amalgamate them all. So this sketch pad has a combination of different cartridge papers, and I know this page is cartridge paper. One or two signatures in there with mixed media paper, which I kind of think's the same as cartridge, and just to add a bit of variety in there, there's some watercolour paper in there too. Because I change my mind on mediums so much, I thought adding different types of paper in there might encourage me to keep it all into one sketch pad and actually finish one. Can anyone relate to that as well? Do you have about several sketch pads on the go? Some of them kind of recent and some of them, oh, you could say years old. I'm terrible for that. A few years ago I did manage to complete a few sketch pads, and I have one or two other exceptions to that rule, but on the whole, I'm terrible at it. I'm sure you've seen all the different sketch pads I've used on this channel. But hey, I've digressed again. Let's talk about the painting, shall we? So I have created a character emerging from a body of water, we'll say. And I suppose really it's actually the ocean, because our character has two space buns in the form of jellyfish. I thought that would be quite an interesting take on this character. I've got no history or story to give you behind it. I just thought this would be a good start to a first page. Again, following on from the ARTFUL box video, I'm going to keep referring to that. I want to use these inks as a bit of a way of loosening up, really, because once that ink is down, it's not really going to shift, and I guess that's the idea with acrylic inks. They're quite permanent once they're on the paper. So if you make a mistake, you've kind of got to be able to rectify it or live with it, and I think they are both good exercises and good practices to have especially when you're starting out. Actually, I tend to find when you go from one medium to another, especially when it's a water-based one like this, you can adopt habits from one which might not apply to the other, and that's okay. It's all part of experimenting, but watercolour's quite safe for me because if I make a mistake, I can lift it, or I can disguise it quite easily and no one would ever know. Whereas the acrylic inks are quite unforgiving. Again, that's not a bad thing. It's going to help me to make better decisions where I lay the ink down. But it's also going to stop me from being really pernickety and such a perfectionist about things as well. It's okay if you go from a very tight style to something a little bit more loose and relaxed as part of exploring materials and maybe exploring different styles as well. And there are areas on here that I am not massively pleased about. I think the water could have been better and I perhaps could have been a little bit more attentive to, especially her shoulders actually. But that's okay, I'm just being a little bit critical here. I tend to find that with mistakes like that, I mean I could have rectified it, but this is kind of all in hindsight here. But I could have rectified it by bringing that shoulder in a little bit more when I went around the water again, and there are several layers involved here too. But rather than do that, I thought, well, let's add some details to where the eye is most likely to look first. The general overall form of the character and the highlighted areas where the jellyfish are and where I'm going to start adding the shine to the hair. That's what you're going to see first before you start seeing any of the mistakes. And I kind of think as an artist, and we can all be a little bit guilty of this, when we've made a mistake, because that's something we've physically done to the image, we kind of notice that more. It's a little like when you look at some work you've done a long time ago, and I'm not talking like the other week, I mean years ago, and especially if it's a piece you're pleased with, you kind of don't really see the mistakes straight away. The memories often come back from when you were creating it, but as far as first impressions, well, second impressions, anyway, as far as that's concerned, you're not going to notice that straight away. So sometimes it's good to be a little bit critical about your work and carry that onto your next piece. But other times, don't forget, you're going to notice a few little mistakes here and there because you've created that. Every mark on a page is something that you've done. But hey, I'm probably being a little philosophical here. So a good example of how I'm distracting where the eye's initially going to look is just by adding those highlights in. I wanted to experiment how a paint marker would interact. I do tend to find when I've used these with watercolours in the past, it kind of brings those watercolours back to life, and it's exactly the same with gouache as well. In fact, it's worse with gouache. And I just wanted to see how it would apply to the surface, and I was quite surprised. Some of the layers on here were quite thick and some of them weren't with the acrylic ink, and I wasn't sure how the paint marker would react with that. But I was really, like I say, I was really surprised it didn't shred the paper up. It's almost like the acrylic ink just gave a tiny little bit of a barrier to stop the paper from getting chewed up. You know what I'm on about. It applied really smoothly and it stood out quite well as well. It allowed me to add a little extra definition to those jellyfish and some of the reflective features in the water as well, and I was really surprised. I think if I'd have used these pens neat on the paper it would have completely chewed it, but I think maybe on top of acrylic ink we might have a winning combination here. But of course this is something I'm going to have to explore further. I mean, this is just with a white acrylic marker and they kind of stand out a little bit more than the other colours. But I guess this is something I'm going to have to explore further, and that's what this sketchbook's going to be about. I'm sure I'll probably end up accidentally creating something that's probably a little bit too good for a sketchbook, but that's okay. That can serve as inspiration for a better piece on better paper, or I could just scan it and turn them into prints. It's still good. I am quite aware though I have waffled on a little bit, especially towards the end of this video, so thank you so much if you're still here. I really enjoyed being able to share the first page of this sketchpad with you guys and exploring these acrylic inks a little bit more. If there are any suggestions as to further exploration of these inks within the sketch pad and combining them with other medium, please let me know and I will have a little try and see if I can do something there. However, we are at those beautiful final stages. Now I thought I'd add a few twinkles in the background, but nothing galactic, just one or two, just to let you know it's the night sky. All in all though, I'm really happy with it. I absolutely adore that texture in the background and love how that turned out. As always, I'd love to hear what you guys think in the comments, and I just want to say thank you so much for watching. If you haven't already, please hit subscribe, and there's more videos for you to enjoy too. I'll see you next time. Bye!